Imagine for a moment that you're about to play the biggest poker game of your life. Your opponent, sitting across the table, has more chips than anyone in history. He has the prestige, the legendary reputation, the home field advantage. You came in later with a different set of rules, learning the game in a back room. The world expects a huge, dramatic showdown, a final, all-in bet that decides everything in a blaze of glory and shattered chips. But what if you never planned to play that hand? What if, while everyone is staring at the pot, waiting for the big bet, you've been quietly buying the entire casino? This isn't a hypothetical game. This is the real, quiet, and staggeringly effective economic strategy unfolding right now between the United States and China. And the counterintuitive truth is this: China doesn't need a single missile, a single soldier, or a single declaration of war to achieve a form of economic dominance that could reshape the next American century. In fact, a hot war would be a disaster for their plans. Their blueprint is far more subtle, more patient, and in many ways, far more formidable. To understand this, we need to step out of the fog of daily headlines, the trade deficits, the tariff announcements, the political sparring. Those are just surface ripples. We need to dive into the deep, cold currents of economic history and grand strategy. Think back to the last great global shift in power, the rise of the United States. We didn't defeat the British Empire on the battlefield a second time to become the world's premier economic power. The Revolutionary War was long over. No, our ascent was cemented in the aftermath of a far more devastating conflict, World War I. While European powers bled each other white in the trenches, the United States transformed from a debtor nation into the world's creditor. We financed the war for the Allies, our factories supplied the material, and our economy emerged unscathed and turbocharged. We didn't conquer London, we simply made it so that London and Paris and Berlin were forever in our financial debt. Victory wasn't seized with tanks, it was purchased with bonds and built on industrial might. This is the historical parallel that Beijing's strategists have studied, dog-eared the pages, and taken to heart. Their playbook isn't about 1941, it's about 1917. So, if war is off the table as a desired tool, what is the actual endgame? It's a concept that sounds benign, even technical, but it's the master key to everything. Economic interdependence on China's terms. This is the first pillar of their quiet strategy. The goal is to make the global economic ecosystem so reliant on Chinese supply, Chinese technology, Chinese finance, and Chinese consumer markets that decoupling becomes not just painful, but functionally impossible for nations and corporations. It's about becoming the indispensable artery of the world's economic body. You don't cut out your own heart to win an argument. Let's make this painfully concrete. Look at the device you're watching this on. The rare earth minerals in its magnets and batteries. China refines over 80% of the world's supply. The solar panels going on rooftops across America and Europe. Over 80% of the key components come from China. Your average pharmaceutical, a staggering percentage of the active ingredients, are sourced from Chinese factories. This isn't an accident. It's the result of a decades-long state-sponsored campaign to dominate the entire value chain of critical industries. It refines over 80% of the world's supply. The solar panels going on rooftops across America and Europe. Over 80% of the key components come from China. Your average pharmaceutical, a staggering percentage of the active ingredients, are sourced from Chinese factories. This isn't an accident. It's the result of a decades-long state-sponsored campaign to dominate the entire value chain of critical industries. They didn't just become the world's factory for cheap toys. They strategically targeted industries with high barriers to entry, massive capital requirements, and crucially, ones essential for modern life and national security. They used their state-controlled economy to absorb losses, subsidize producers, and flood the global market, driving competitors in the US, Europe, and Japan out of business. Once the competition was gone, the leverage was born. Now, imagine a geopolitical crisis over Taiwan or the South China Sea. In the old Cold War playbook, you'd rally your allies and impose sanctions. But what happens when those sanctions mean your green energy transition grinds to a halt because you can need Teget solar panels? When your auto industry stalls for lack of batteries? When your drug supply chain faces critical shortages? The cost of action becomes astronomically high. This is what analysts call weaponized interdependence. And China has spent 30 years meticulously building the weapon. But it gets more sophisticated. Controlling physical stuff is only half the battle. The real power lies in controlling the rules, the standards, and the very platforms upon which the future is built. This is the second pillar, shaping the technological frontier. The 21st century will be defined by a handful of foundational technologies: artificial intelligence, 5G and 6G networks, quantum computing, digital currencies, and the Internet of Things. Who sets the technical standards for these technologies controls the shape of the global digital landscape. For decades, the US, through companies like Intel, Microsoft, and later Google and Apple, set the de facto standards for personal computing and the Internet. Now, China is executing a full court press to do the same for the next generation. Look at Huawei and 5G. Even amid intense Western pressure, Huawei holds a massive share of essential patents for 5G technology. This means that even if countries ban their hardware, they may still have to pay licensing fees to a Chinese company. They're embedded in the architecture. Now, let's talk about digital currency, because this is a masterstroke in the making. And while the US debates the pros and cons of a digital dollar for years, China has already launched and is rapidly scaling its digital yuan. It's already being used in hundreds of billions of dollars worth of transactions. This isn't just a digital version of cash. This is a programmable, trackable, revolutionary tool for financial control and international influence. Imagine a world where China offers developing nations a complete digital financial infrastructure, a way to bypass the US-dominated SWIFT banking system, to get loans in digital yuan, to trade directly. For countries chafing under US sanctions or weary of the dollar's dominance, this is an incredibly attractive alternative. It creates a parallel financial universe with Beijing at the center. They aren't trying to immediately dethrone the US dollar. That's a decades-long project. They're building the viable alternative so that when the world starts looking for options, they're ready and waiting. And this leads us to the third and perhaps most profound pillar, the patient capital offensive. While the US financial system is laser-focused on quarterly earnings reports and shareholder returns, China is playing a game measured in decades, even half-centuries. This is possible because of a fundamentally different structure, the fusion of state planning and corporate ambition. Through entities like the Belt and Road Initiative, state-owned banks, and sovereign wealth funds, China deploys trillions of dollars in patient capital. This isn't venture capital looking for a 10x return in 5 years. This is strategic capital looking for a 100-year return in geopolitical alignment and resource security. They build a port in Sri Lanka, a railway in Kenya, a telecom network in Latin America. Often, these projects aren't immediately profitable in a pure accounting sense, but the profits come in other, more valuable currencies. They come in political goodwill, in long-term leases on strategic assets, in locking countries into using Chinese technology standards, and in ensuring that key resources flow back to Chinese factories. They are building a new global trade map, with all roads leading back to Beijing. For the recipient countries, it's a devil's bargain. Immediate, tangible infrastructure today in exchange for deep, long-term dependency tomorrow. This is the economic version of what military strategists call slow salami slicing. One slice, one port, one loan, one standard at a time. The global landscape is being irrevocably altered. Now, you might be thinking, hold on, this sounds ominous, but China has huge problems. A demographic crisis, a debt-laden property sector, slowing growth. Isn't their model flawed? And you are absolutely right to think that. Their challenges are immense and very real. But here is the counterintuitive twist. These internal weaknesses don't necessarily invalidate their external strategy. In some ways, they might accelerate it. A China facing slowing domestic growth has an even greater imperative to secure external resources, external markets, and external leverage to maintain stability at home. Economic friction with the West isn't a detour from their plan. It's a feature of it. The dual circulation policy announced in recent years explicitly states this. They aim to fortify their domestic market as an unshakable base, the internal circulation, while using their enhanced position to more aggressively shape the external global circulation. The pressure at home increases the focus abroad. So, what does all of this mean for you, sitting here in the United States? This isn't just abstract geopolitics. This is about your portfolio, your job security, the cost of the goods you buy, and the technological world your children will inherit. The shifting plates of this economic contest will create seismic waves in every market. Let's break down the tangible impacts, the quiet tremors you need to watch for. First, the era of predictable low-cost globalization is over. The supply chain shocks we saw during the pandemic were a preview. As the US and its allies attempt to de-risk and bring manufacturing of critical goods home or to friendly nations, costs will rise. This means higher prices for everything from electronics to electric vehicles. It is a form of embedded inflation that central banks can easily fix with interest rates. For investors, this signals a long-term tailwind for companies in sectors like industrial automation, onshoring manufacturing, and resource extraction outside of Chinese dominance. But it also signals persistent pressure on the profit margins of companies that have relied on ultra-cheap Chinese labor and components. Second, technological bifurcation is coming. We are likely heading toward a world with two distinct tech ecosystems, one led by the US and its allies, and one led by China and its partners. Think of it as an Android versus iOS split, but on the scale of entire national infrastructures. This has huge implications. If you're a US software company, vast markets may become inaccessible if your product doesn't comply with Chinese data laws or runs on Chinese-approved platforms. Conversely, Chinese tech giants will find their growth capped in the West. This fragmentation creates inefficiency but also opportunity. It will spawn a new generation of bridging technologies and companies that can navigate both worlds, and it will force explosive innovation within each block as they compete. For an investor, picking the winners in this new, fractured landscape requires a map of not just balance sheets, but of geopolitical alliances. Third, and most crucially, is the slow, grinding pressure on the US dollar's supremacy. This is the slow-motion heart of the contest. The dollar AS exorbitant privilege, its role as the world S reserve currency, is America's greatest financial asset. It allows us to borrow cheaply, to sanction effectively, and to export our monetary policy. China's strategy is not to launch a big bang attack on the dollar tomorrow. It's to chip away at its edges year after year, by promoting currency swaps with other nations, by pricing key commodities like oil and minerals in yuan in bilateral deals, and by building the digital yuan infrastructure. They are creating escape hatches from the dollar system. It's death by 1,000 cuts. The end state isn't a world where the yuan reigns supreme overnight. It is a world where the dollar-S share of global reserves slowly declines from nearly 60% to, say, 50%, then 40% over the coming decades. That erosion, while slow, would fundamentally increase borrowing costs for the US government, reduce our financial leverage, and force a painful fiscal reckoning. This is the ultimate defeat they seek, not a collapse, but a gradual relative decline in American financial hegemony. This brings us to the million-dollar question: what can be done? Is this economic contest a foregone conclusion? Absolutely not. The United States and its allies hold immense enduring strengths. Our universities are still the world's best engines of innovation and attract global talent. Our capital markets are deep, liquid, and transparent. Our culture of entrepreneurship and creative destruction is a powerful force that top-down planning often struggles to replicate. And crucially, we have the power of choice. The response cannot be a mirror image of China's state-led model that would be playing their game on their field. Instead, the response must leverage our unique advantages, agility, innovation, and the power of alliance. Think of it as a strategic counterplay. First, we must double down on our innovation moat. This means sustained, significant public and private investment in the foundational technologies we discussed: AI, quantum, biotech, advanced energy, not as a one-off stimulus, but as a generational commitment. The CHIPS Act is a good start, but it's just the opening chapter. Second, we must build a new, resilient, alliance-based trade network, not just free trade agreements, but friend-shoring partnerships with nations that share democratic values. Imagine a tech corridor linking US R&D with manufacturing capacity and trusted allies like Japan, South Korea, India, and parts of Europe. This network would be harder for China to co-opt or disrupt. Third, and most importantly, we must get our own fiscal house in order. The greatest vulnerability in this long game is not a Chinese gadget. It's America's mounting debt. A strong, stable, and credible dollar is our fortress wall. Persistent trillion-dollar deficits and political brinksmanship over the debt ceiling are like sappers tunneling under that wall, doing more damage to our long-term position than any foreign competitor could. Fiscal discipline is not austerity. In this context, it's the most critical form of national security. The narrative we started with, the poker game, was a simplification. The reality is even more complex. This isn't a zero-sum game where one must lose for the other to win, though elements of it are fiercely competitive. The global economy is a vast, interconnected web. A prosperous, stable China that plays by international rules can be a net benefit to the world. But the China we see today is playing a different, long-range strategic game designed to tilt the playing field permanently in its favor, using economic tools as its primary instruments of power. They are proving that, in the 21st century, the most decisive battles won't be fought over hills and beaches, but in semiconductor fabs and undersea data cables and central bank digital ledger protocols, and in the long-term infrastructure loans that bind nations together. For you, the financially curious viewer, understanding this slow-moving tectonic shift is more than academic. It's essential for navigating the coming decades. It means looking at your investments not just through the lens of PE ratios, but through the lens of geopolitical resilience. It means asking, is this company reliant on a single point of failure in its supply chain? Is this technology likely to be caught in the crossfire of tech bifurcation? Does this asset provide a hedge against a less dollar-centric world? The answers will shape the fortunes of the next generation. So, as you go about your week, I want you to ponder this. Look at the objects around you. Your phone, your car, the medicines in your cabinet. Trace the invisible lines back to their sources. Consider the digital platforms you use and where their data flows. You are already living inside the landscape of this quiet contest. The choices made in boardrooms in Silicon Valley and Shenzhen, in the halls of Congress and Zhongnanhai, will determine the shape of the landscape for your children. The war drums you hear on the news are loud. But pay closer attention to the quiet hum of the server farm, the silent glide of the container ship, and the digital whisper of a currency transaction. That is where the future is being written. And understanding that script is your first and most powerful line of defense. If this deep dive into the real economic contest has you rethinking your assumptions, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what is the one industry or technology you think will be the most critical battleground in this next decade? Let's get a conversation started. Before we finish, let's take a step even further into the future, to a scenario that ties all these threads together. Imagine it's 2035. You walk into a store in Jakarta, Indonesia. You pick up a next-generation device, let's say augmented reality glasses. You pay for them not with a credit card, not with Apple Pay, but with a digital wallet on your phone that instantly converts a fraction of your paycheck into digital yuan to complete the transaction, seamless and fee-free. The glasses themselves, while designed by a local Indonesian firm, are built with Chinese semiconductors, run on a Chinese-developed operating system, and connect to a 6G network built by a Chinese telecom. The raw materials, sourced from a mine in Africa that was developed with Chinese loans, and is shipped on a Chinese-built railway to a Chinese-operated port. The data from your glasses, anonymized and aggregated, feeds AI models in Shanghai that refine consumer trends and urban planning algorithms. Where is the United States in this transaction? Perhaps in the intellectual property for one of the microcomponents licensed from a US firm for a fee. Perhaps not at all. This isn't a world where America is poor or collapsed. It's a world where America is simply less central. It's a world where the economic gravity has shifted, not with a bang, but with a billion silent, efficient transactions. This is the endpoint of the strategy we've outlined. Not conquest, but ubiquity. Not dominance through force, but through indispensability. This path is not inevitable. Scenarios are not predictions. But they are possibilities we must understand to shape a better outcome. The most powerful tool we have is awareness itself. By seeing the game board clearly, we can make smarter choices, as investors, as citizens, as a nation. The 21st century's great story is still being written. And as with all great stories, the most compelling chapters are about adaptation, resilience, and the enduring power of innovation born from freedom. If you want to make sure you don't miss the next chapter of this ongoing analysis, of breaking down the complex forces that will shape your financial future, then you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We're just getting started. Thanks for watching.